My name is Margaret Doyle. I'm 61 years old, retired after 35 years as a school counselor, and I live with my husband Richard in a quiet town in Vermont. Our house is one of those old New England homes, white wood panels, creaky floors, and an attic that always smelled of dust and paper. It carried a kind of charm, the kind that made you proud and uneasy at the same time. That morning the sky was heavy with rain, the kind of gray that made you want to clean and reset everything. I wanted the house spotless before the weather turned damp again. My back wasn't what it used to be, so I hired Abby Collins, a sweet girl from down the street who cleaned houses to pay for college. She was polite, shy, and always on time. I gave her clear instructions: dust the library, wipe the stairs, and be careful with Richard's old bookshelves. Then I grabbed my keys and went to meet my best friend Laura for coffee. We hadn't seen each other in months, and our chats were my escape from the slow rhythm of retirement. We were sitting by the window of a little cafe when my phone rang. It was Abby. Her voice was trembling so much that I could barely understand her. "Mrs. Doyle," she whispered, is someone else in the house?" My heart stopped. "No," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "Why do you ask?" There's a woman on the second floor." The words came out like a broken breath. "She's wearing a long white dress. I saw her walk down the hallway and go into the last room." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The cafe around me vanished. All I heard was that whisper, thin and terrified. "Abby," I said firmly, "get out, right now. Go outside and wait for me." I called the police before I even started the car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. Every mile between me and that house felt endless. I kept seeing the image of a woman in white, standing in my hallway, a stranger in the home I thought I knew better than anyone. When I reached home, 2 police cars were already parked by the front gate. Their flashing lights painted red and blue streaks across the wet driveway. Abby sat on the porch steps, pale and trembling, her hands gripping her phone as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. I rushed to her, knelt beside her, and asked if she was hurt. She just shook her head, her eyes wide and empty. "She was there, Mrs. Doyle," she kept repeating. "She was right there." 2 officers came out of the house, one older, calm and firm, the other younger and clearly trying to look braver than he felt. They told me they had checked every corner of the attic, the closets, even behind the curtains. Nothing, no signs of forced entry, no footprints, not even a window latch out of place. Everything was sealed just the way I had left it. I thanked them, embarrassed by the fuss, though the unease still twisted in my stomach. Abby apologized, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe it was my eyes playing tricks," she said. But I could tell she didn't believe her own words. I paid her and told her to take the rest of the day off. She never came back after that. I walked through the house slowly once everyone had gone. The silence felt heavier than usual, as if the air itself was waiting for something. Upstairs the hallway smelled faintly of lavender and dust. I stopped at the last room on the left, the one Abby said the woman had entered. It was Richard's small library, the walls lined with his books, the desk covered in scattered papers. Everything was exactly in place. Still, I couldn't shake the chill running down my spine. I opened the closet, checked behind the curtains, even looked under the desk. Nothing. Just the faint creak of the floorboards under my feet. By the time Richard came home that evening, the sky had cleared. When I told him what had happened, he smiled, a small, patronizing smile I didn't recognize. "You know how old this house is, Maggie. Shadows, light, reflections, they can fool anyone." He kissed my forehead and walked away, humming softly, as if the thought of a strange woman in our home was nothing more than a silly story. But that night, I couldn't sleep, because deep down I knew what Abby saw wasn't just a shadow. Weeks passed, but the tension in the house never really faded. It lingered in the corners like a shadow that refused to leave. After retiring from work, I began spending more time at home, and that was when I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. At first it was just faint sounds coming from the attic, soft thuds, like something small had fallen. Then came the creaks, slow and deliberate, as if someone were pacing above my head. One night, while reading in bed, I heard the distinct scrape of a chair being dragged across the floorboards. My heart skipped. Richard was asleep beside me, breathing evenly. I nudged him. "Did you hear that?" He didn't even open his eyes. "It's an old house, Maggie. Wood moves when it's cold." I wanted to believe him, but the sounds grew more specific: paper rustling, a soft tapping, sometimes even what sounded like footsteps stopping right above our room. It wasn't the random creaking of wood. It was rhythm, movement, life. One morning over breakfast, I tried to bring it up again. "Richard, there's something in the attic." "I'm sure of it." He didn't look up from his newspaper. "Probably mice," he said. "I'll buy traps." True to his word, that afternoon he brought home a box of heavy metal traps, the kind that snapped shut with a loud click. He set them near the attic stairs, dusted off his hands, and gave me that reassuring smile. "There, you can sleep peacefully now." For a while the noises stopped. The silence was so complete it almost hurt my ears. I tried to convince myself it was over, that it really had just been mice. But then other things began happening, small, strange details that made no sense. One Friday, I bought a piece of spicy sausage from the market. It was my little treat since Richard couldn't stand spicy food. I wrapped it carefully and left it in the fridge for the weekend. The next morning I found half of it gone, sliced unevenly as if cut in a hurry. "Did you try some?" I asked him. He looked up surprised. "Yeah, felt adventurous," he said with a grin. "Wasn't bad." That moment froze me. In 35 years of marriage, Richard had never eaten anything remotely spicy. I laughed it off, but something in me twisted. Maybe it wasn't about the sausage. Maybe it was about realizing I was starting to live with a stranger and I wasn't sure which of us was more afraid. It was late autumn when I decided to clean Richard's library. The air carried that crisp chill that makes old wood smell sharper. He had gone to town for errands and I wanted to surprise him by organizing the mountain of papers always piled across his desk. Writing had made him messy, he said. Creativity needs chaos. I never argued with that, but I couldn't stand the dust. The shelves were lined with his novels, 10 of them, all bestsellers. Each one bore his name in bold letters, Richard Doyle. I'd read every single one, proud of the man who had built a literary empire from our quiet life. But as I picked up a stack of loose pages to dust underneath, something slipped and scattered across the floor. When I bent down to gather them, I noticed the drawer on the bottom left of the desk had popped open slightly. It had been stuck for years, sealed by humidity and neglect. I hesitated, then pulled it. The wood groaned, giving way with a dry snap. Inside was a small, leather-bound notebook, its corners worn and its cover faded to a deep brown. It didn't look like anything Richard would use. He preferred laptops, clean screens, perfect margins. He always said handwriting was for nostalgia, not professionals. Curiosity pushed me to open it. The pages were filled with neat, looping handwriting, feminine, soft, elegant. It wasn't his. I read a few lines, my pulse rising with every word. They weren't random notes or journal entries. They were story ideas, character sketches, plot outlines. One described a woman living alone in a mountain village, waiting for someone who never returned. Another was about a secret buried under a family home. The writing was haunting, emotional, vivid, and all too familiar. They were scenes from Richard's books. I sat frozen, the notebook trembling in my hands. My mind raced. Had he collaborated with someone? Ghostwriters were common, but Richard never mentioned one. And this notebook, it looked decades old. I ran my fingers over the handwriting again, recognizing turns of phrase one read in print years ago. For a moment I thought of confronting him. But then I imagined his reaction, his calm explanations, his charming half-smile that could make any lie sound reasonable. No, I needed to know more before saying anything. So I slid the notebook back into the drawer, hiding it under the old papers. But that night I couldn't sleep. The wind outside brushed the windows, and the attic groaned softly above us. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about that handwriting. Whoever wrote those words had a voice that felt alive, and I had a feeling she wasn't gone. A few nights later, I woke to the sound of something creaking above us. It wasn't the usual settling of the house. It was slower, deliberate, like a door being nudged open by careful hands. I sat up in bed, my pulse drumming in my ears. The air felt heavier than usual. "Richard," I whispered, shaking his shoulder. "Listen." He groaned, annoyed, half asleep. "What now, Maggie?" "The attic," I said. "Something's moving." He sighed, threw off the blanket, and walked out into the hallway. I followed close behind, gripping the rail. The narrow corridor was bathed in moonlight. When we reached the top of the stairs, the attic door stood slightly ajar, its latch dangling loosely. My stomach twisted. Richard stepped forward, pushed it shut, and slid the lock into place. "See?" he said. "Just a draft." His tone carried the exhaustion of a man tired of entertaining his wife's fears. But I knew what I saw. The door had been closed the night before. Completely. The next day, I tried to brush it off. I kept busy laundry, cooking, rearranging the pantry, but unease crept back as soon as night fell. Around midnight I woke up again. This time the bed beside me was empty. The covers were cold. I waited a few seconds, expecting to hear the flush of the bathroom or the creak of a floorboard. Nothing. I slipped on my robe and stepped into the hallway. A faint glow spilled from downstairs, flickering across the walls. As I reached the staircase, a soft clink echoed, a porcelain plate hitting something solid. Then footsteps, cautious and slow. When I looked down, I saw Richard halfway down the stairs. He was barefoot, moving quietly, holding one of our dinner plates. When he saw me, he froze. His eyes widened and the plate slipped from his hands, crashing against the tiles. The sound shattered the silence like glass. I flinched. He bent down immediately, picking up the shards with trembling fingers. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice low, uneven. He didn't answer at first. "I couldn't sleep," he muttered finally. "I was working upstairs and got hungry." "Upstairs," I repeated. "You mean the attic?" He hesitated just for a heartbeat, but it was enough. That pause said more than any denial could. Then he forced a smile, the same careful, practiced smile I'd seen when he wanted to make something disappear. "You're imagining things again, Maggie. Go back to bed." But I couldn't, because for the first time I was sure someone or something was up there with him. 2 days later, Richard announced he needed to get away for a while. "A few days up north," he said while packing a small suitcase. "The mountains always help me think." His tone was calm, but something in his eyes flickered, something between guilt and fear. Before leaving, he placed his hands firmly on my shoulders. "While I'm gone," he said, "don't let anyone in. Especially not anyone from the paper. If my editor shows up, tell him I'm away and you don't know when I'll be back." I nodded, but the warning sat heavy in my chest. Richard had never spoken to me like that before. It didn't sound like advice. It sounded like an order. He left that morning. By noon, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a gray coat and a younger woman beside him, Mr. Harris, Richard's editor, and his assistant. He looked impatient, tapping his foot against the porch. When I opened the door, he brushed past me. "Miss Doyle," he said sharply, "please tell your husband to answer his phone. We've been waiting on his manuscript for weeks." "He's gone," I replied carefully. "He left for a short trip." Mr. Harris laughed bitterly. "A trip? Strange. Because your neighbor, Mr. Brooks, says he sees the attic light on every night around midnight. If Richard's up there working that much, he should have a dozen manuscripts ready by now." His words hit me like cold water. The attic light. I never went up there, never even thought to check. "You must be mistaken," I said weakly. "We hardly ever use that space." But my voice betrayed me, even I could hear the tremor. Mr. Harris frowned but softened. "Look, I'm not here to pry. Just tell him we're worried. He's missed 2 deadlines." When they left, I closed the door slowly and leaned against it, my heart pounding. If Richard wasn't home, who was turning on that light? Every clue, the noises, the missing food, the open door, the half-eaten sausage spun in my mind until one truth rose above the rest. Someone was living in our attic. That night, I didn't hesitate. I fetched the old folding ladder from the shed, dusted off the cobwebs, and dragged it to the second-floor hallway. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that holds its breath. I placed the ladder beneath the attic hatch and looked up at the darkness above me. My fingers trembled on the latch. It was time to know. The latch was stiff with rust. I had to use both hands, pressing hard until it gave way with a loud metallic click. A wave of hot, stale air rushed down, thick with the smell of old paper and damp wood. My phone's flashlight sliced through the darkness as I climbed the ladder, one cautious step at a time. Each creak under my feet sounded like a warning. The attic was larger than I remembered. Stacks of cardboard boxes covered furniture, and sheets heavy with dust crowded the space. Cobwebs hung from the rafters like ghostly curtains. But at the far end, beyond the shadows, a faint yellow glow flickered. It wasn't my flashlight, it was an oil lamp. And next to that light, someone was sitting. She was turned away from me, her thin frame hunched over a small table. Her hair was long, white, tangled like cobweb threads spilling over her shoulders. She wore a faded cream dress torn at the sleeves. The soft scratching of a pencil against paper filled the room, slow and steady, as if she had been writing for hours. My throat went dry. "Hello?" My voice barely rose above a whisper. "Who's there?" The pencil stopped. For a moment she didn't move. Then, slowly, she turned her head. The lamplight revealed a pale, hollow face, eyes tired, sunken, but achingly familiar. My breath caught. I felt my knees weaken, my heart stutter in disbelief. It was Helen, my sister. The sister I hadn't seen in 28 years. The one everyone believed had vanished after running away from home. The one whose name my family stopped mentioning because it hurt too much. She looked at me as if seeing a ghost. Her lips trembled, shaping my name. Maggie? I couldn't speak. My chest ached as I stumbled forward. Helen, I whispered, tears burning my eyes. Oh my God, Helen. She tried to stand, but her legs trembled. I caught her before she fell, feeling the sharp bones under her skin, the fragility of someone who hadn't seen sunlight in decades. Her body was warm, real, alive. Behind her, the small corner of the attic told its own story: empty cans, water bottles, a thin mattress, piles of handwritten pages stacked neatly beside her. A hidden life, preserved in silence. I held her close, my tears soaking into her tangled hair. You're home, I said softly, though I already knew home was the place that had caged her. Helen and I sat in the living room, the light from the lamp washing over her fragile face. She looked exhausted, her hands trembling as she held the glass of water I'd given her. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then, slowly, she began to talk, her voice hoarse, thin, but steady. Maggie, she said, I never meant to disappear. I didn't run away. I was trapped. She told me everything. Decades earlier, she had worked for a newspaper in Boston. One night, her editor invited her to his apartment to discuss an article. When she arrived, he was drunk. His words turned threatening, his hands rough. In panic, Helen grabbed a marble statue from the table and struck him. The blow was quick, desperate, and fatal. I didn't mean to kill him, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. I just wanted him to stop. Richard was the one who found her that night. He said he was in the area, came to invite her to dinner with us. But when he saw what had happened, he didn't call the police. He told her the truth would destroy her and me. You'll go to prison, he said. Let me help you. For Maggie's sake. So he buried the man's body in a remote spot near the old forest and brought Helen here, to our house, while I was asleep. It's just for a while, he told her. Until things calmed down. But a while turned into years, then decades. He locked her in the attic, made sure she stayed hidden. Whenever I asked about her, he said she'd chosen to live abroad, that she needed space. My mind swirled as she spoke. Richard, my husband, my partner, my supposed protector, had turned my home into a prison for my sister. But that wasn't the worst part. Helen lifted her eyes to mine. I wrote to stay alive, she said, to stay sane. But when he found my stories, he said I had talent. He said he'd help me share my words with the world. She paused, her lips trembling. Maggie, he published them. Every book under his name, they're mine. The truth hit like a storm. Every award, every speech, every fan letter Richard received, all stolen from the woman he kept in the dark. The next morning, I drove Helen to the police station. She sat quietly in the passenger seat, clutching a small notebook, the same one I had found in Richard's drawer. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was calm. I can't hide anymore, she said. I've paid enough for my mistake. At the station, she confessed everything. The detective listened in disbelief as Helen explained the night of the accident, Richard's involvement, and the years she spent imprisoned in our attic. They reopened the missing person case from decades ago, and a search team was sent to the woods where Helen said Richard had buried the body. It didn't take long. Beneath an old oak tree, they found human remains. DNA confirmed they belonged to her former editor. That same evening, the police arrested Richard as he drove back into town. According to the officers, he didn't resist. He simply said, "I knew this day would come," and lowered his head. His face, once so composed and charming, was now blank, hollow of all the lies he'd lived behind. The case exploded across the media. Reporters called it The Writer and the Woman in the Attic. The truth stunned everyone who had ever read his books. People couldn't believe the man they admired for his empathy and storytelling had stolen every word from the sister of his own wife, a woman he had kept hidden for nearly 30 years. I hired a lawyer to defend Helen, hoping the court would see the years she spent locked away as punishment enough. The case for leniency was strong self-defense, psychological captivity, and manipulation. But Helen couldn't bear the noise, the cameras, or the weight of her own story being dissected by strangers. 3 days later, the phone rang. A calm, official voice spoke, "Mrs. Doyle, I'm so sorry. Your sister took her life last night." The words didn't sink in at first. My body went cold. My knees gave out. They handed me a letter she had written. Her handwriting was shaky but clear. "Maggie, don't cry. I'm finally free. The last story is in the attic. Please, let it bear my name, Helen Moore." I held that letter to my chest until the paper grew wet with tears. My sister's freedom had come too late, but I would make sure her voice would never be silenced again. Months passed before I could climb back into the attic. The police had cleared it out, taking the pages Helen wrote as evidence. But the space still carried her presence, the faint smell of ink and paper, the ghost of her quiet perseverance. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the house fell silent, I finally went up again. Under the table where she used to write, I found the wooden box she mentioned in her letter. Inside were hundreds of handwritten pages, yellowed but carefully stacked. It was her autobiography, the story of her life, her dreams, her pain, and her hope. Her words flowed with honesty so raw it hurt to read. She wrote about our childhood, the laughter we shared, the night that changed everything, and the decades she spent in the dark. Every sentence carried a piece of her soul. I spent weeks editing it, staying up late with a cup of cold tea, whispering through tears, "I'm sorry, Helen." I sent the manuscript to Richard's former publisher with a note explaining everything. At first they hesitated. Then they read it. The editor called me days later, his voice shaking. "Mrs. Doyle," he said, "this isn't just a story, it's a testament. We'll publish it exactly as she wrote it." The book, titled The Woman in the Attic, was released under Helen Moore's name. Within weeks it became a phenomenon. Readers wrote letters, thanking her for giving voice to silence, for showing strength where there should have been none. Richard's old works were reissued, this time with her name on every cover. Justice, in its quiet way, had found her. I turned the attic into a small library, filled with her books and sunlight. Whenever I stand there, looking out the window at the world she never got to see, I whisper, "You're free now." And to anyone listening, I say this: no wall is thick enough to keep the truth buried forever. Lies rot in silence, but truth breathes, even through dust. If this story touched you, share it, tell it, and remember, every voice, no matter how long it's been silenced, deserves to be heard.